Right, this is something different for us today on the Rosendale Collieries thing. We're at a Viking festival. It's in Cumbria, and it's a dedicated bit of a Viking village actually, Moorforge. And I was hoping, I've come really for Ben and Steve to see if they were going to do any iron smelting. It doesn't look like there's any ironwork going on. So you guys owe us 60 quid. They'd be like 20 quid a piece. But they're going to have a Viking battle anyway, so I'll have a mooch around some of the stuff. But sadly it doesn't look like there's any form of iron work or iron smelting. The blue bit's a river.
He's on the left!
How long have you been involved? What's your name first?
Gary.
Gary.
Yeah.
It's a Viking.
No. Most people know me as Wayland, to be honest.
Well, oh right.
You know,
Yeah.
which is named after a sort of Viking named Smith, or a Smith of the Gods.
Right.
But there's a connection with my surname as well, which is Wade's son. And Wayland was the son of a giant called Wade.
Oh right.
So, as such, I've been known as Wayland for 30 odd years really, but technically I'm Gary.
How long have you been in? Oh, is it like a childhood thing that you were interested in and you've carried it through?
No, I hated history at school.
Get away.
Yeah, my old history teacher's idea of a lesson was open your books at page 48 and answer the questions.
Aye.
And I swear sometimes he said, don't disturb me. You know, so I left school hating history, not interested at all. Got involved with doing archery, and a friend of mine sort of invited me onto one of these things. And the battle was kind of interesting, but what I found fascinating was people living and demonstrating and, you know, camping, things like that, and making things.
Yeah.
Making things has always been my...
Yeah.
And I'm looking at these people and thinking these people are living in a handmade world.
Yeah.
You know, there's, I can see things that are just needing to be made.
You look at the skills. I remember my dad telling me he'd been to Norway in the 50s on a push bike,
Yeah.
and he'd gone into this museum and he said, we've gone backwards in our skills. As you look at the old stuff, the Egyptian stuff, Viking stuff, and then you looked at the stuff they'd made in the 1600s, it's as though we'd retarded. Obviously now it's different with all the machines, but the skills that they had, like I said, just using hands.
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, I work with kids, I do education work in schools, and, inevitably some kids sort of ask, well, where do you get all this stuff? And when you say, I made it, they say, no, where did you buy it? No, I made it.
We made it. Yeah.
And for most of them, they can't get around the fact that people can actually make things. I mean, yeah, they make things in school out of cardboard boxes and bits and pieces. They don't really make something that's real to them. What they're doing is, although they're learning the skills of putting things together, they're not really making something that's, got a real object skill to it.
Right, Sam, what Viking burger are you having then?
Oh, I'm having a Viking hot dog.
A Viking?
Viking, no, that's a pub, isn't it? A Viking. What's that? Hot dog.
Right, what is it? Any mead?
Mead. So this is.
That's a speak up.
Do you want to do a bit with the guy?
Pleased to meet you. My name's Clive.
I'm Chris. Nice
Pleased to meet you, Chris. And Ed tells me that you do mead.
Yeah.
You've set up your own business and you know all the ins and outs of the history, how it all works.
Yeah, I mean, mead is effectively the oldest alcohol known to man. And there was a sample found last year, I believe, or maybe the year before in China, which has been carbon dated, and it dates back to 3500 BC.
Right, wow.
So it is literally the grandfather of every alcohol that you can think of. Back in the day, they didn't have sugar to ferment, so they fermented honey. Obviously, sugar didn't come around until about 1800-ish. So honey was used openly. Honey's been used for many things throughout history, like mending wounds, used as resin, that kind of thing. So yeah, it also makes alcohol.
Yeah.
Depending on what you put into your mead, depends what kind of classification your mead becomes. So this purple mead here is effectively a plain mead. It does have a tea in there called Victoria Turn tea, which just gives it its colour. It has a little flavour for itself that my palate didn't pick up. If you want to make a metheglin mead, you add herbs and spices, so like chamomile and lavender. You also have saffron and vanilla, which again classes as a metheglin. I call this an experimental melomel. So a melomel is a mead made with fruits, and the reason it's experimental is because I add toffee at the very, very end of it to back sweeten it.
Right.
If you use wine grapes, it becomes a piment. Apples is a cider, so just like cider. And then you can make braggots using things like hops and coffee and other beer ingredients, and the list just keeps going and going and going. A funny story about the metheglin for me is when I was walking through Horton one day, I just wrote meth on the front of the box. Because I knew what it meant.
Yeah.
He knew what it meant. But everybody else was like, look, I was like, why is he carrying a box of meth? So yeah, mead isn't just associated with Vikings. It literally spreads over the whole of history. Ethiopia and Poland have very strong mead traditions. So in the UK, you can effectively make anything a mead because there's no real legislation for it. But in Poland, on the other hand, if you're not using, I think, is 25, 50%, or 75% honey, they won't accept that as a meat. It's got to be, it's got to reach that criteria, and it's also got to be aged for a set period of time as well. And that depends on the overall alcohol content. Ideally, it should wait a month to percent. Should you? Should do. Our mead ages out in about 6 months. hopefully one day I can age it out longer.
It's really nice. Fresh room.
Once the business is bigger and stronger, that's when
What's
like
in here?
the main focus of it.
Poison.
When I first come there, because I wanted to learn about the iron smelting, I'm not into
Yeah.
battling and that, you know.
No,
But
that's-
talking to some of you, it's fantastic. You know, you can really make the place come alive. And guys themselves.
Like
Not
things
anymore.
like the longhouse being built, there's obviously meat
Oh,
all
what
over there.
Yeah.
By doing the
Over
ferment,
there as well. It's
translate
like,
out.
this place is getting bigger and bigger and better. And I can't wait to be a part of it more. Like, I don't know how else to describe it.
No? Well, thanks.
Some people buy them and
Better get you, let you get on
but
making some money. And thanks for talking to me. I hope to see you again as well.
No, thank you
And,
very much for the interview.
been enjoying that as well.
Let's do it.
See you later.
Thanks. Take care.
watch it all the way out.
That's over there. That's over there. No, we're over there.
A lot of the skills that we're using here, we've had to kind of really learn from scratch. You know, how did they do it? And you trace it back through the tools and the marks that the tools make. You know, for something like this. Now, put that to the side for a moment. You can tell from this that they've got a stamp which makes a pattern like that. So you've got the head of the tool, but you don't know what the rest of the tool looks like.
No.
Now, an archaeologist might find something like that. Rusted stub of something. And what's he going to say? Is it a nail?
Aye.
Or is it a punch?
Yeah.
Or is it part of something else?
Yeah.
And, you know, no idea in a lot of cases. So, what we have is we have the jewellery, which generally survives it's from precious metal, and from that we can trace all these different sort of stamped data. So very often you kind of retro sort
You're
of
working backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
to actually sort of find out what these things, you know, were and how they were.
You get a view of history that's given you, don't you? Now, this is the established thing. We'll get it in coal mining history. This is the established order. And you look into it and think, no, it isn't. But you can't ask anybody. You're going out on a limb with a bit of a theory. You're trying to work with
Well,
something.
this is a good example of that, actually, in that these are called weathervitting, which basically means weather vane.
Ah, right, yeah.
Right, now they've survived to us on churches, you know, on church steeples, and attached to a vertical pin, then yes, sure enough, the wind is going to be the main thing that's acting on it. But they were designed to go on ships.
Were they?
And there's a, you know, it won't really come out on the camera, I'm afraid, but this is a stick that was found in the harbour at Bergen.
Yeah.
And it was preserved because of the wet ground. And what you've got is that you've got a sailor. I think he's a sailor because he's observed the planking very carefully, and he's made this scene. And you've got all these little ships, right? And on 2 of them we've got animal heads, as you'd expect with a Viking ship. 3 of them have these on the front. You can see them very clearly.
Yeah, just, yeah.
Great. Now, what's not so clear is there's a flag here flying, and that's pointing in the opposite direction. So the wind's blowing that way, but all these weather vitting pointing the other way. Now feel the weight of that.
Yeah, it's a considerable weight.
Yeah,
it is.
a lot of
isn't
weight
it?
there.
Yeah.
And if you look at the originals, they had a big sort of lump of weight on the end there.
Yeah.
On a ship where the bow of the ship is going to be moving forward and back, side to side, gravity is going to have a lot more effect on that than the wind.
I would say so, yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's more to do with the loading of the ships.
Oh, right.
You know, it's very important you don't have your load too heavy on one side and the other.
So it's giving you
You're going to get a
it's like a spirit level.
Yeah. Or the other thing is it's important to make sure that your ship's not point nose down or too far nose up.
Yeah.
So actually balancing the ship when it's being loaded with ballast and cargo, very important.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And I think this mounted on the front, if there's too much weight on that side, it's going to swing that way. If too much weight on the other side, it's going to swing that way. I think that's what they're actually about. I mean, the name Veðurviti is old,
Yeah.
but it's being written down a couple of hundred years after the period of the actual Vikings. By which time the ships have gone, they've moved on to something else, so different kind of ships as it were. These are then, they're being found in churches because a lot of the ship's equipment was stored in churches when, it wasn't in use. Found in the churches and things like, I suppose that would look quite good on the steeple, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the point that the name Veðurviti is being written down.
Yeah.
At that point, they probably are being used as a
Yeah. But beforehand.
beforehand, they're being used for something completely different.
Yeah. Well,
Don't think you're distracting too much. Sorry, what?